Who stood out to you the most during the most recent OTAs and minicamp? These are still voluntary.
Yeah.
It's not mandatory yet, but who stood out to you without me leading you in any direction? What'd you think of the minicamp?
I'll give you 3 names. Let's start with one that I think just almost has to be said. It's almost a prerequisite. I think I saw you said that Ricky Pearsall is a pro. There's just like a veteran. I think that was the headline on one of your videos. Like I called him a pro. Like that guy just looks like he's going to get 65 catches for 850 yards and 5 touchdowns, and it's just going to be steady Eddie, easy as it goes. Doesn't matter if you got Ayuk and Debo and Jawan. Like the guy's just going to be there. And I thought, even though he was wearing a blue jersey yesterday for reasons not explained, I just thought he looked like someone who had been in the league for a long time. And that was something I expected, but it's still good to see. So I had to get that one in.
The blue, I think, probably just means stay away from him, right? He probably
it didn't look like anyone was taking that advice, given some of the coverage he was getting.
Oh, really?
And that kind of leads me to
I saw him getting bumped around a little bit too, but it did make me wonder why he was out there. It was like kind of a baby blue jersey he had.
Yeah,
on.
It didn't even have a number. But
he's very refined. I mean, you can see, so much about playing receiver is keeping your feet and keeping your balance. You can see as far as he can make lots of high speed movement, ins and outs and all kinds of footwork, and he remains balanced at all times. So that was good to see.
The guy that actually lined up across from him a couple of times really impressed me. And this is a free agent signing that very much went under the radar. And I do think it highlights something that's even more under the radar. Isaac Yiadom, the cornerback that they signed from the Saints, played the Charvarius Mooney Ward role yesterday at training camp, or OTAs, or whatever the hell we call it, minicamp. And I thought he looked really good, really fluid, good on jams. I think he absolutely should be considered the favorite to start opposite Mooney going into the season. And that's with Renardo Green really impressing every time I've seen him on the field. But I think Isaac Yiadom is not just some special teams guy. I think that he's a real deal player. And the 49ers cornerback room is like suddenly very deep, like shockingly deep. Like they're going to have to cut a good player or at least intriguing player come the end of training camp, unless they want to carry one more than they expected. And a guy that I have to say on sort of a negative tone that surprised me, I thought Josh Dobbs would look competent better. I mean, it doesn't look right. He's got this big windup on the throw. I'm not big into throwing mechanics and stuff, but I was wildly unimpressed. I'm not a big Brandon Allen guy. He made a couple nice throws, couple bad throws. I think the Niners are pretty much screwed if they have to go to a backup quarterback. But Josh Dobbs was a signing where you go, hey, if that's your third quarterback, you're sitting pretty. I don't know if I can maintain that stance anymore after what I've seen. 7-on-7s are informative when it comes to quarterback play, at least when it comes to the floor of a quarterback. You should be able to really zip the ball wherever you want on the field when you don't have a pass rush coming against you. And I was just really, like, I took note of how unimpressed I was with Josh Dobbs. And I know he's a really smart guy, and I know that he won some games last year for a couple of different teams, but I'm not sure that the Niners won't regret not bringing in a kid in the draft late rounds just to compete for that spot, because I also don't see it with Tanner Mordecai either. I know you're big on Mordecai,
I like
relative
Mordecai
to most, but and it might end up being Mordecai because Dobbs is so unimpressive. But I'm pretty concerned about the backup quarterback position for this team right now, and that's something that's going to linger with me until we get to next week, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on both fronts. I like. Well, first, let's start with the quarterback. I like the idea of Dobbs as far as he's athletic.
Yeah.
He's got some experience. But the more I watch, the more I think if they go with who operates the offense better, don't be surprised if it's Purdy and Allen and Mordecai and Dobbs is like, well, we thought he was going to be good, but he couldn't beat out He didn't beat out Brandon Allen, and then he couldn't really outplay Tanner Mordecai, and thus we're going with those guys and not going with him. Do you think there's any chance at all any chance at all that what happens this summer makes the Niners go away from Dobbs and go with Allen and Mordecai? Is there?
Yeah.
Absolutely. What's their investment? I mean, remember they weren't going away from Sudfeld because of the $2 or $3 million investment, and then suddenly Sudfeld wasn't there. But I mean, what's the investment here in Dobbs?
He has $1.75 million in guaranteed salary. I mean, if they cut him, it's effectively the Nate Sudfeld with inflation. And if they cut him, it'd be $2.25 million. So
it's not nothing, and it's unlikely to happen, but it's not for sure.
If Tanner Mordecai
gets outplayed by Mordecai will get that gig
by a margin. I mean, we just did this, and it seems ridiculous now because it's been many eras. But when Purdy was beating out Sudfeld, it was undeniable. I mean, you saw it first in training camp, Larry, and then we started to notice it a little bit more as training camp went along. And Sudfeld objectively sucked, and Purdy kept showing positive signs. Then they get into the preseason games, and Sudfeld sucks even harder, and Purdy's out there just looking like the reincarnation of Russell Wilson and ripping up in preseason. And at a certain point, you go, we can't get this Brock Purdy guy to the practice squad. So if we have to eat $2 million, so be it, but we can't do it. But now we know with hindsight and, people talking about things, everyone wanting to pretend like they knew all along, Kyle telling, Jed York after the first practice or whatever, like our best quarterback is Purdy. That's a convenient story to tell now, probably a difficult stance to actually hold in the moment. I don't know if it happened or not. I think it's a nice thing that people like to tell themselves to make.
You think Kyle was lying?
Yeah, I think that story might be embellished a bit, but who gives a damn?
I think he may have said that.
Yeah,
but all I would say to all Niner fans and all Niner content creators and all media, is go out there and watch the practice and judge for yourself, and don't take everything they say at face value, because there are reasons to say things. I've had general managers say, don't, Krug, I know you like undrafted free agent X.
Yeah.
Do not ask me about him at a presser. I will tell you right now, we love him, but if you ask me 3 questions about him, he won't sneak through waivers.
Right.
Please don't ask me about him. And that's not like, that's a bunch of crap. No, I had a general manager say that to me early. He said, dude, I know you're on this guy. I've heard your shows. I've heard
you need to shut the hell up. You're
please shut up about this guy.
Yeah.
So, if Tanner Mordecai plays well in the preseason, especially after the 49ers discovered Brock Purdy and found him in the, at the Mr. Irrelevant pick.
Right.
If Tanner Mordecai plays good football, either against the Saints in those practices or in the preseason, and Shanahan says anything positive about him, that right there is probably enough for him to not sneak through waivers.
I'll say this, though. I mean, $2.25 million for a guy who did win games last year. Like Nate Sudfeld was always a player in theory, right? Like he never won. I mean, in fact,
He's still in Detroit now as Goff's backup. I think
Sudfeld's claim to fame prior to showing up in San Francisco was that Doug Peterson used him in a game, last game of the season, and the world accused Doug Peterson of tanking the game because he put Nate Sudfeld in. So it's not as if Nate Sudfeld was some, washed up veteran looking for his last legs. Like Nate Sudfeld was never a player. I listen, I watch.
I'll say this though, the guy's an athlete, because in the locker room they have that basket.
Yeah.
According to Aaron Banks, Trent Williams, I said, who's the best basketball player in here? And he's like, man, before we cut him, it was Nate Sudfeld, man. He was just draining shots.
I'll say this. I mean, I remember Nate Sudfeld, 1 at Indiana, and then 2 when he was first in the league with the Eagles in preseason. It was pretty obvious there was something there. But I think he got injured a couple of times in preseason. It's like it was a big bet. And ultimately, it wasn't one that the 49ers felt comfortable continuing to make when it was pretty obvious. It was pretty obvious that that Brock Purdy had something that they couldn't get through waivers, and couldn't deny was happening. And that's a good problem to have. That's a champagne problem. It's on Tanner Mordecai, to push it and to really outplay, I would argue, both Allen and Dobbs, because I think both of them are 100% gettable. Like, I'm just not a Brandon Allen guy. I know that he is, in theory, the number 2. I think if he's your number 2, you better have a number 1 for all 17 games because you're not winning with him as
He's
your
a
starting
smart
quarterback.
guy that when you're watching film is probably a great guy to have in the room.
Dobbs too, right? Dobbs is this astronaut kind of guy. I mean, I do think that it's interesting that Kyle, after trying with Trey Lance, and this isn't to impugn Trey Lance's intellect or anything like that, but he was a guy who didn't have a lot of football experience. And between Jimmy Garoppolo and then Trey Lance, Kyle wasn't exactly having highbrow conversations, high-level conversations about offense and complex offensive, just it was pretty simple, the conversation. He was trying to dumb it down for those guys, is what it is. Now you look at his room and it's Brock Purdy, whose superpower is that he's just a computer. He processes better than almost anybody in the league. He's Kyle's Kirk Cousins, and that's what Kyle really valued in Kirk Cousins, that he was a true offensive coordinator on the field, understood all the concepts. You could throw him new plays, new wrinkles at halftime, and he could integrate them into the overall scheme. I mean, really difficult things for any football player, much less a layperson, to do. And then you also have Brandon Allen, who I agree with you is a very sharp guy and understands the concepts, who can have an intricate conversation about the offense and what the defense is doing with Kyle. And then also Josh Dobbs, who's widely regarded as one of the smartest players, football or not, in the NFL. So it is interesting that Kyle has sort of gone that direction of, we tried out athleticism for the sake of athleticism. We're going with brains now. We have to have a room full of brains. I don't know where Tanner Mordecai fits in with that, but it is a pretty high bar for him to cross. And it does seem as if that's where Kyle's priorities lie going into this season. And you know what? He might be right.
I asked Kubiak, I said, what do you think of Mordecai? I go, what stands out about Mordecai? And he's like, first word, he's like, competitor, which I love as the first word.
Good.
I mean, that's like my favorite first word for a quarterback. When I asked Greasy about him, I said, hey, you had a hand in scouting Brock, and you also, according to Kubiak, went through the quarterbacks this year. What did you like about Mordecai? And you know what? I'm starting to think Greasy's got a really good eye. Because he's like, there's lots of things I like about him, but he's athletic, he's accurate, and he said Luke Fickell, the head coach at Wisconsin, told him if there was one guy that he would get up on top of the table and pound the table for, it would be Tanner Mordecai. And that's interesting.
I've known Luke for a long time, and going back to my South Florida days, Luke is not a BSer. Let's put it that way. So that's interesting. To his detriment, oftentimes.
He talks too much. MF says, Larry, I went to Pig and a Pickle after the Rockies game 2 weeks ago. Awesome.
Hell yeah.
MF. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue you're going to find. All right. So as far as the other thing you brought up, Isaac Yiadom, and I like Yiadom. I think Yiadom's really underrated.
Yeah.
But to me, the two guys that stood out in minicamp, one was that, I don't know if you want to call it a post route. I thought it was like kind of a deep cross, but I thought the Purdy to Jacob Cowing.
Yeah, that was a really nice play.
Deep cross, post route, deep in, whatever you want to over route. I'm not sure exactly where he started, but it looked like he was lined up on the left side and he went from his left to his right. And Purdy looked like he threw it about 10 feet in the air.
That's right.
This guy went up and got it, plucked it with his hands in a crowd, came down, didn't take a hit because it's minicamp, but there was a bunch of bodies there.
He was pretty fearless on the play for sure. I
think Purdy is going to love Cowing. And the fact that, because, and Cowing creates separation, and Purdy says he's where he's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. They've obviously repped it out a little bit on the field already. Yeah. And I just think that if he is reliable as Brock says he is, and he's got that 4.38 separation ability, and he's going to, go after those 50-50 balls and pluck it with his hands, and he's not afraid to make plays in the middle, especially the deep middle.
Yep.
Man, I mean, if you want to say where does Brock Purdy love to throw the ball the most, I would say he loves to throw it in the deep middle, intermediate middle, and deep middle, intermediate maybe to Ayuk, deep maybe to Cowing. Mm-hmm. So I loved what I saw from Cowing. The other guy that I thought was just awesome, and I was just like, wow. This is what I thought we were going to get a year ago, and I never quite saw it. And that was Darrell Luter. Darrell Luter had a pick.
Yeah.
He had a pick in this thing. He also his movement ability, his confidence, he just looks like a guy who is absolutely on a totally
Yeah.
different stratosphere than he was last year. And I don't know if it was the meniscus or what. South Alabama's a big jump to the NFL.
No doubt.
But man, I
Well
think
coached at South Alabama, though.
Luter's got real talent because he's the size of Mooney Ward, and he's probably a little bit superior athletically.
Yeah, he can move.
You know, so I mean, we're talking about a really good corner and a big corner at that. Yadam's a big corner too. But yeah, to me, it was like, whoa, Cowing on the perimeter and Luter look like those guys are going to be huge contributors.
I agree with you on Cowing. And I'm curious to see if it translates into preseason games, right? Because he's a guy who's just going to be out there a lot. I have a feeling like he's a really good practice player because he's somebody who can execute a few certain things at an exceptionally high level. And that's what we saw again and again and again at Arizona. I do think it's telling, you know, Jed Fish was the head coach at Arizona. That's a guy who goes back with Chris Forster. Forster is Kyle's right-hand man now. It gets all very, it gets a little, I don't know if it's nepotism because that's not really, a little insidious when it comes to, I knew this guy from that time and this guy, you know, vouches for that guy. But when you watch the Arizona tape and you watch what is a very pro-style offense they ran at Arizona last year, it was a lot of those 7-yard cutouts. It was a lot of, you know, drag routes over the middle. These are staples of a Kyle Shanahan passing offense. And Cowing, we could point at a lot of the, you know, testing numbers and say this is why it happens. I just think he has a knack. And I know that that's not great analysis most of the time, but I just think he's built to run 4 or 5 routes at an exceptionally high level, and that he has the physical traits and the mental, it's not acumen, but he is clearly somebody who is willing to put his body on the line. And Pearsall's somewhat the same way, though I don't know if Pearsall is as precise when it comes to certain routes. And certainly one of those routes is that deep over. You're 100% right. That's where Brock Purdy likes to throw the ball. Brock Purdy really finds like a perverse amount of pleasure in feathering the ball over a linebacker's hands. And we also saw him get into trouble yesterday by not being able to do that. And that's something we often see in practice. Brock Purdy isn't that great of a practice quarterback. He tries a little bit too much. He tries to push the boundaries a little bit because he has such a great control over the offense. He's not concerned about getting the basics down. Those are down pat. He's trying to push the envelope, see what he can get away with in a practice setting so he can pare it back a bit for a game. But yeah, you're right. He loves that. He loves that pass over the middle. And it's not as if he can't push it to the sidelines. That is the big difference between him and his predecessors. As for Luter, I got to admit, like I missed it. I asked, you know, like coach Jake Hutchinson, what did you notice out of Luter? And we didn't really have anything to go on. That said, I know that the 49ers love Luter in a way that they like everybody on the team, but they really talk him up. They really like to let people know how in they are on this guy, and they're priming people up for the breakout. And if it's coming this year, it's a good year for it to happen because, as I said earlier, Yadam is in, right? You have Chase Lucas. He's going to be your backup slot behind Diamador Lenore. So now you got Mooney Ward, Yadam, Lenore, Lucas. There's 4 right there. You're carrying 7. Womack. And so now you got Ambry Thomas, Womack, and Luter battling out for 2 spots. I mean, I don't know if they can take all of them. And I like Womack a lot. I know that they are really going to push him on special teams. Luter can be viewed in the same way. Ambry Thomas was the guy starting, quote unquote, yesterday. He was the opposite corner to Yadam, who was standing in for Mooney Ward. There is a real possibility that by the end of training camp, the 49ers have taken a guy who is number 1 at a position on the depth chart at OTA's minicamp, and they've cut that guy because he got outplayed by the 2 dudes under him on the depth chart, and 2 dudes that I think we should, not even to mention Renardo Green, who has been marvelous.
He looked really
they got
good
a lot of
too.
dudes. They got a lot of dudes at corner, and that is just such a that is such a change from recent years where they're signing dudes off the street and Jason Verrett's got to come in and blow out his ACL again. Like they now feel like they are really deep there. And it's important not just for this year, but also next year when Mooney Ward is probably on the chopping block. They've really done a nice job at that position in building depth for the here and the later.